Good day, everyone. We are happy to have here Aleš Maršál from the National Bank of Slovakia. He will have a presentation on the topic of prescriptions for monetary policy when inflation is high. And well, just let me mention that here at the NBU we proceed our research-based discussions for topics that are relevant for Ukraine, in particular in these harsh times. And to some extent, we are lucky that other countries also experience high inflations, and we can attract economists to talk about this topic as well. So Aleš will give us some prescriptions for the policy when inflation is high. So Aleš, the floor is yours. You have an hour for the presentation and for Q&A afterwards.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me today. So I'm going to present the joint work with Catherine. She's also here and connected, and with Laurent. So basically the question we are asking is how should monetary policy authority respond to high inflation? So we look at this question through the lens of the nonlinear New Keynesian model. And basically the prescription for monetary policy we outline is a policy interpretation of the underlying paper on undesired consequences of carbon pricing in the nonlinear world. So I was told that people also focusing more on policy are going to be here. So the way I cook up the presentation is that first I focus more on the storytelling part of the model, and then I turn a little bit more to the technical aspects. So if you are a little bit bored at the beginning, so please bear with me. Okay, so the inflation in most advanced economies has been rising at a fast pace since 2021. So in the mid-2022 inflation rates in the US, they were above 8%, Euro area, they were above around 10%. So here at this chart, you can basically it just illustrates it. This shows the CPI for US, EU, United Kingdom, and Canada. Here I have a chart for the Slovak economy. So also the inflation was close to the 16%. Here I took the plot for Ukraine. So basically, irrespectively of the war situation, you are experiencing basically the same thing, or similar thing as in terms of inflation, what the other economies are experiencing. So the question is how much of this burst in inflation is only temporary, and how big part of it is actually persistent or even permanent increase in inflation. So actually, it is not really easy to decompose, the inflation series statistically, but one idea is to use the theory to give us some guidance. So basically, I'm using thinking it through the New Keynesian Phillips curve, where inflation is just the sum of inflation expectations. And so by iterating this equation to forward, you see that the inflation are just the longer inflation expectations. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm looking at the longer inflation expectation, or I'm looking at the inflation expectations in several countries, and you can see that if you look in the US, so these are the inflation expectations of the professional forecasters. They are going up. Inflation expectations in EU are rising. In Slovakia, they are like super sharply rising up. Even if you look at the inflation expectations for US taken from the swaps, for instance, so they are also going up. So kind of the so where I'm heading. So I want to argue that part of the inflation rise actually became the trend inflation, so became a persistent rise in inflation. So actually, so is this a problem? So actually, what most of the theoretical empirical economics would say is actually no. So there is a consensus that money are neutral in the medium to long run, and cost of risk permanent inflation are not high. So basically, the argument is that the nominal income can adjust for anticipated inflation, which leaves people almost as well as they would have been in the absence of inflation. So here is just the chart showing the evolution of CPI and earnings in US. So you can see that in the long run, actually, they sort of co-move. There's also empirical literature showing that the correlation between the real output growth and inflation or the price inflation rate is close to zero. So, but on the other hand, like people really tend to hate inflation. So, for instance, this detail up paper in AR, they show that people in the high inflation countries are much more unhappy than people living in low inflation countries, and they, it's AR, so they really showed it's because of the inflation. Or for instance, Robert Schiller has a really nice paper when he questions like people in US in the 90s, and he asked them about their attitude to inflation. So he, for instance, shows that people hate inflation much more than the unemployment. So this can be seen also for this from this Gallup poll chart. So you see that in the 70s and in the 80s, when there was a high inflation in US, so the green line shows how that people were concerned much more with the inflation than they were with the unemployment rate, which is this lighter green light. So maybe some anecdotal evidence. So when I'm going to work, I'm always passing a big poster which it says that you might not be able to avoid inflation, but you can avoid cancer. Come, to ask for a checkup or something like this. So they really put it on the same level. People tend to put it on the same level as cancer. So people have this strong aversion to inflation. So just like from in a way from a fun. So I replicated the Schiller paper in. I asked people in the Slovak National Bank, and I get the same result. So and what is amazing that it really made a big vibe. So I got back like 150 questionnaires, and people writing in open questions why they hate inflation and how much they hate it and how much so it made really the vibrant effect. So so why exactly is inflation so bad, and why it has such a large cost for people? So in a way we try to provide one story to help to explain this disagreement between the results of the economic theory and people's attitudes. So the reason in our model is the misalignment in relative prices. So basically, these mechanisms will create the self-driven inflation spiral, and it leads to large output losses. I will get to it later. So first give me some intuitive example what's going on later on in the model. So think about this this basket as a consumption basket in January 2022, right? So in the economy there is a 10% aggregate inflation. So the inflation is 10% of the CPI. And now let's just focus on the two breweries, like to take example. Let's think about this, that this will be the Lvivské beer, and this could be the Obolon. Hopefully that I got it right. So let's just, for the sake of example, so let's assume that the Lvivské thinks, okay, so there is a 10% rise in aggregate level, but maybe I don't want to increase it by 10% because I might lose the market share. So they increase the price only by 5%. So on the other hand, the Obolon thinks, okay, so maybe I see that the prices are growing. So if we increase by 10%, we need to increase in a few months again by some additional percent, So what they decide to do is that they increase straight away their prices by 15%, right? So then the 1 year passes, there is still the aggregate inflation is 10%, but now the Lvivské, just to catch up for the aggregate price level, right? So they have to catch up is 5% and another 10% for the 2023. So they need to increase by 15% just to catch up the aggregate level, right? And maybe they decide to add an additional 5% because again, not to change prices, not to have to change prices soon again. So basically, they increase their price by 20%. Then the Obolon will see, okay, the Lvivské increased 20%, so let's increase another 15%, right? So basically, this catching up with the aggregate price level and search for the optimal relative prices among firms, then contributes yet to another increase in price level. And basically, we show later on in the model that this mechanism of price adjustment can generate the self-enforcing price inflation spiral. Okay, so on what does it depend if this price inflation spiral is triggered or no? So like the big say has the monetary policy, right? So the standard prescription for monetary theories from this textbook is as long as you follow the Taylor principle. So it means that the central bank reacts to inflation more than 1-to-1 with increasing its interest rate. The inflation expectations are well anchored and inflation is stabilized, right? This can be generalized to basically to the determinacy region, where which spans the region between the weight on inflation and weight on output gap. So as long again as the central bank reacts strongly enough to this deviation of inflation from its trend and output from its potential, then inflation expectations are well anchored. So, but we show in our model like that once you allow also for this dispersion of prices and this misalignment in relative prices, that can be an important source of inflation instability. And so in order to anchor inflation expectations in presence of this price dispersion spiral, the monetary policy needs to respond much more aggressively. So they need to set much higher weight on inflation, and basically in some cases is not allowed to respond to real economy at all. Okay, so is there actually any empirical evidence for this channel? It's hard to measure the dispersion of prices directly, but again, some of the information can be inferred from the inflation expectations of price setters. Right, the price setters are eventually those. The firms are eventually those who set the prices, right? So we can take a look how the inflation expectations of firms and households look like, right? If they get more dispersed with the inflation. And that's exactly what I'm doing at this chart. So you see that the household, those are the U.S. household survey inflation expectations, and they go over time, right? So you see that over time, as the inflation was increasing in the U.S., the distribution is more and more dispersed. So, for instance, in Slovakia, I have quite detailed data, and there it's extremely pronounced the way the inflation actually is dispersing the distribution. So the inflation expectations are basically all over the place. So another thing which is characteristic for current situation is the uncertainty about the growing uncertainty about the future. So I like to give a narrative story about it. So I have a good friend at the bank here. So we are kind of like a model example, because we are both of us are the same. So we both love macro. We are both into road cycling, and we both of us actually bought the house last winter, and which was in construction. And so the only difference between me and him is that he's doing the linear model and I'm doing the non-linear models. So he exactly behaved according to his consumption oil equation. So what he did is he saw that the prices are increasing, so he bought his kitchen 1 year in advance and stored it into the storehouse. Me, I'm doing the non-linear models, so I care about the uncertainty. So I didn't know what's gonna happen the next year. So for the precautionary reasons, I didn't purchase the kitchen, right? And you can see this actually in the data that you can see it in the bond prices that the risk premium is going up. Also, that the dispersion expectations that were already showed is growing. That people are more uncertain about what's going to happen. So where we are standing. So what I wanted to say in the previous slides, that we are now in the world where the longer run inflation expectations are well above zero. So which means that the part of the inflation is a trend inflation. So the low frequency component of inflation is elevated, which means that prices are more dispersed across products. and we live in the in the world where there is a higher uncertainty about the future path of inflation. So inflation is harder to predict. So if you want to think about these things, you need a non-linearly solved model to bring in the price dispersion and the uncertainty.
Aleš, I have a quick question here, which goes to the heart of the mechanism that you put forward. So you showed us in the beginning, you started off by putting the question in terms of the uncertainty between transitory and permanent. And then we went to the production side, and you showed us this mechanism where, the two companies are trying to outsmart each other on how to price. And because of their, let's call them errors, in relative pricing, they can set off, in a sense, they can set off a wave of increases in prices, right?
So this is not really errors, right? So it might be optimal from their point of view, or they don't have.
Yeah, that was a little bit my question now, because you have 10%, which is constant across the two firms. But of course, we do the pricing now, let's say in January, we go to December, I price according to 10%. You price according to, let's say, 15%. And then our adjustments in the same market, I'm a small company, you're a big company, maybe, or vice versa. Then, they're going to show up in the dispersion. But this does not yet clarify if I think that this is going to be permanent or not. At the end of the day, it's a game that we play where I'm very much worried that I could lose market share, even if it's a very small increase in price for a small period of time.
So the way we actually approach it, that we have a standard Calvo pricing, but in this nonlinear world, and we show that from the certain level of already dispersed prices, when the inflation is higher, and there is some shock which brings the inflation up, this price dispersion spiral can kick in and can be triggered, and it's basically no way back, right? So unless the monetary policy is really aggressive on stabilizing inflation.
Okay.
So this was more like the intuitive story to explain what the dispersion of prices is. So it's not. So in another way, I'm telling some story why the firms are not adjusting their prices, but then I'm just modeling it, exogenously. That is the Calvo ferry and.
Okay. But the story of different market power is actually valid, because there are papers that talk about this. Because once you have more market power, you actually.
Yeah, exactly. But we are not endogenously modeling it.
Okay,
So we take the shortcut by assuming the Calvo prices.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, let me the mouse. Okay, so what is the model like? We use so there's a large amount of literature actually, and there is a consensus among economists, right? So that the prices are rigid, so that they respond, in the sluggish way to the new economic environment, and this gives rise basically to the. This is the justification for the monetary policy, right? So it might be from the perspective of one firm, it might be optimal not to adjust the prices, right? If I am selling ice cream, I wouldn't want to change the price every 30 minutes based on the market price of my inputs, right? But from the aggregate point of view, this brings the losses of output, right? Because the prices work as a signal for allocation of the scarce resources. So this gives the in the literature foundation for the central bank, which should try to stabilize the price level, so kind of internalize this externality. So while we know that the prices are rigid, we don't really know why. So the most common way to model them is to use the Calvo pricing, and that's exactly what we do. It's in a way shortcut. So you can think about it as about Calvo ferry, right? So it's an old fairy tale from Kiev. So each morning when the Kiev firms wake up, there's some exogenous fraction which are visited by the Calvo ferry. And this is this benevolent spirit who lives in the Richard's castle, and she's flying there in Kiev, and she just randomly visits some firms which are allowed to change their price. So what is what this leads to is that it creates the distribution of prices in the economy. So because some firms are not allowed to change the price, right, to optimize, so they are stuck with their old price, and some firms are able to change it, so it creates many different prices in the economy. So here is the exact example of how the distribution of prices looks like in the model. So this one is if there is the zero trend inflation, and this one is for the positive trend inflation. So you can see here that once the aggregate level is growing, the dispersion of prices will be bigger, right? This is because imagine that you are the firm here and you haven't been visited for long by the Calvo ferry, and once you are visited, then you need to just to catch up, like the Lvivska, to catch up the aggregate price level, you need to change your price a lot, right? And maybe you increase it even a little bit more, just to compensate for the fact that you might again be unlucky and not visited by the Calvo ferry. So our non-linear, actually, if you log linearize the New Keynesian DSG model, you lose this. So the price dispersion is always 1. So you get the distribution of prices you get into the model only if you go for the non-linear solution. So basically to demonstrate the price dispersion spiral, so we start, we take as a point of departure like a canonical, textbook version of the New Keynesian model, and later on we generalize it into. We also demonstrated this is quantitatively relevant in the larger model used for the policy analysis. So the model is really a standard textbook model. So the households, they maximize their utility from the consumption stream. They don't like to work. They are subject to the budget constraint, where they used as a saving instrument, they buy government bonds. They pay for their consumption basket. They get the money from their wage income and from the maturing bonds. For the firms operate on the monopolistic competition, and they are subject to the Calvo prices. So the price they set, so they maximize this present value of the future profits, and the price they set is the markup, is this monopolistic markup, and this markups from the fact that they have sticky prices over the marginal costs. And the monetary policy does that. It follows this simple Taylor rule, where it puts a weight on inflation, and so it sets the nominal interest rate in response to the deviation of inflation from its target, and the deviation of output from its steady state. So where does the dispersion comes from in the model? So the firms, the individual firms, the firm I, for example, Lvivska, right, they use the complex production function, where they have a fixed capital, and they use the labor inputs to produce, and they face the downward in price, downward sloping demand curve for their goods. And if you join, the labor demand with the labor supply, and you aggregate, basically you sum over all the firms, you get the aggregate production function, which you see that this S, it summarizes the dispersion in prices. So it's an index, it's a summary of the distribution of prices as I showed you, and you see that it basically works like the magnifier, or there's a negative TFP shock. You can think about it. So basically it creates the losses of output. So it's a measure of it measures the cost of misalignment in the relative prices. So you can use the Calvo result, and so basically this is the fact that the probability that you are visited by the Calvo ferry and you are able to change your price, it's exogenous, it's random. So then you can write this equation in the recursive form. So you see that the dispersion depends on yesterday dispersion, right? And on the price changing firms. So those are the firms which were lucky. It's the price of the firms which were lucky and were visited by the Calvo ferry. And you can again substitute for this pi star, the optimal price, and you can substitute in the inflation. And so you derive this equation 14, and again you can see that the today dispersion of prices, so the distribution of prices, depends on the yesterday dispersion and on the aggregate price level. And so what we show basically is that for certain ST minus 1, so for the certain dispersion and for certain combination of inflation, the ST minus 1 will always imply ST which is bigger than ST minus 1. So this equation becomes explosive and generates this self-enforcing price dispersion spiral. And so the explosion in inflation expectations as well. And also the higher the steady state of inflation, so when the higher higher the trend inflation, so the probability that the exogenous inflationary shocks will trigger this price inflation spiral increases. Again, the reason is that the trend inflation spreads out the distribution, as I show you, distribution of prices, and those firms which cannot change their price, are left. So maybe I show it on the. Again, if you are left far away here in the tail of the distribution, then you need to jump a lot, and by changing the price a lot, you generate again high inflation, which contributes again to this large weight here. So the inflation will be big which will generate again more price dispersion tomorrow. So basically, what you see in this chart is the equation, the recursive form of the price dispersion I showed you is just in the picture. So here is the yesterday price dispersion, and here is the other level of inflation on the y-axis. And this threshold region, this red line, it shows you all the combinations of the price dispersion and inflation where the ST is equal to ST minus 1. So in this pink region, the price dispersion spiral is contained, so it's not triggered, right? And if you get above this, that you get this self-enforcing price inflation spiral. And this blue line and the green line, those are just for the illustrative purposes. So maybe I should highlight the one thing: there is no approximation or the solution method involved in this region, right? It really comes from the recursive form of the price dispersion spiral. So here, these lines they come already from the solved model. So if you solve the model in the perturbation methods by the third order, you will get this line, and this comes from the linear solution. So you see that already for the relatively mild levels of inflation, here will be annualized inflation 6%. So you get above the threshold in this standard New Keynesian model, and so you would get on this explosive path, and with unanchored inflation expectation.
Could you please clarify the stability definition in a stochastic model? Because one of the state variables here is the productivity shock. So how do you define a stability region here?
So we define the stability region that ST is equal to ST minus 1, right? So as long as you are at least in this region, then you are not on this explosive path, right? So the stability region is defined as a ST is equal to ST minus 1.
But the path is stochastic, right? Because it depends on the realization of productivity shock in the following periods. Exactly.
So so in the paper, I don't have it in the presentation, but in the paper we also have like a 3D charts where we actually show the space. We show it over the ST minus 1 and over the AT region when the model is stable, when the price dispersion is well contained and it's not explosive.
When you say stable, you mean for any realization of productivity shock, we have an explosive path?
Yeah. So okay. So this is this one is for the one fixed A. So this is for the A at the steady state. But in later on, when we compute the stability region, we compute over the whole grid over the whole realization, over the whole distribution of AT. If this was okay, or should I more elaborate? So this one is just for the illustrative purposes. Now I fix the AT at a steady state, the TFP shock. But later on, when I show you the simulations, we calculate it over the whole grid or the whole realization of AT.
But then how, if the previous state ST minus 1 is equal to 1, then how can inflation be away from 1 if there is no productivity shock and there are only 2 states in this model?
So these policy functions are already taken, they are taken already from the from the model solution, right? So they already, but they are also fixed on the AT. So what do you mean is that if the inflation is at its steady state, right? So how this can generate ST bigger than ST minus 1, right? So if you see that you are at a steady state at 1, then basically the inflation will be also 1, right? It depends on the steady state inflation. So I'm a little bit. If you could maybe say the question again, if I understood it correctly. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a sense of this picture because you have 2 state variables and kind of inflation is supposed to stand here for the second state variable, right?
No, inflation is an endogenous variable. It's not state variable. The only state variable is ST minus 1. Sorry, ST minus 1 is the state variable.
All right.
And AT is the exogenous one, yeah. So basically, maybe to say it again, so what I do is basically I numerically solve this equation, right, for the parameters. And I solve for each S, T minus 1, the pi, which implies that the ST is equal to ST minus 1. And this is exactly this region, this threshold region. And then for the illustration, I take from the simulated model, right? From the model solution, I take the policy functions, which again are the policy function of the state variable, right? What the inflation is is a function of the state ST minus 1 and the exogenous shock AT, and I fix the AT at the steady state, and I plot the policy function, right? Otherwise, it would be the flat area in the space, right? So I would need the 3D plot, which we have only in the paper, so I didn't put it here. So is it already a bit clear, or?
No, I was more about the threshold region here. How can we be above or below that red line if the second state variable is 1? But it's okay. We can proceed.
Okay, so it can be above 1 because the inflation it depends on the state, right? So if the S is already large enough, it will imply higher inflation tomorrow. So the inflation depends on the ST minus 1, right? As well as ST. But maybe we can get to it a little bit later. So traditionally, macroeconomic dynamics have been studied primarily in terms of this on the log linear approximation, right? So also most of the discussion on the optimal monetary policy have been done in the linearized models. So in the linearized models, there is no price dispersion. So the linear model approximates the distribution just by line. So it doesn't have this distribution dispersion of prices, and also the uncertainty about future enters the decision function of agents because of uncertainty in the linearized model, there is no uncertainty because of the certainty equivalence. So so this is just again to show you a bit what's going on here. So what I do here, I just take the price dispersion equation, right, and I calculate the analytical approximation, and I plot it with the level of inflation. So here you see the S, the true nonlinear S. Here, if you approximate it by the line at the 0 steady state inflation, that's why you get the always price dispersion one, right? It's out. Here is the third order approximation, and here is the second order approximation. So, and here that basically, that's the literature, for example, Guido Ascari is doing. So they do the linear approximation, but not at a non-zero inflation steady state. So they assume the positive trend inflation. So they get some price dispersion, which would follow this line. It's also helped me when I later on show you the results. So I will refer to the fact that for the high inflation, this thing gets again down, and actually at some point even crosses the price dispersion of 1. This I didn't tell you. So there is the lower bound on price dispersion, right? So the least dispersed prices you can have is when everyone charges the same price, right? So the minimum price dispersion is 1. So you see in the model later when this price dispersion spiral is kicked in, and because of the third order approximation, so you can get at the situation where this lower bound is violated. That's probably just shooting too many information right now.
So between those two models, the model to the left could be a proxy for a model with indexation, and these days people across the world are asking for this indexation. Would you agree that such model would be such basic New Keynesian model would be more realistic than the one to the right, where you put trend inflation only in the monetary policy room?
So exactly. So if you introduce the trend inflation, so basically it means that you kill the price dispersion again, because the people just, the Lvivskaya would just by default adjust to the aggregate price level, so that there will be the misalignment in the relative prices would shrink significantly. So basically, yeah, exactly. So if you introduce the indexation, you kill this channel. But so I was I remember when I was taking course from Larry Cristiano, who invented basically, or introduced in the literature the price index, the indexation. So then, basically, on the scores, he argued that the firms in reality they don't index prices. So it's a way to say to basically not to allow or strongly mitigate the effects of this channel of price misalignment, but there is not much empirical evidence for price indexation.
Well, but it's like not really killing, but like putting it to the right degree, not to exaggerate that effect either. So in the nonlinear world, you do have a risky steady state of price dispersion, right? Maybe you're not referring to that risky steady state in your article, but maybe it would be good to point out where that risky steady state is located and how far is that from 1 if you have a trend inflation indexation.
So like in a few slides, I will get to the results, to the numerical results, and there that's what I will show you, the basically the risky steady state, or I will refer to it. Yeah. Okay, so so let me get back to the slides. So what should monetary policy do to anchor inflation expectations in the nonlinear world with uncertainty and dispersed prices? Right. So the standard thing is that in the linearized model is the determinacy region, right? So so basically the solution to the DSG model is just the xt is a function of xt plus 1, right? The expectation of xt plus 1, and so the result is that the model is determined by the eigenvalues of this matrix H lie within the unit circle, right? And by with the phi pi and phi y, you can control the eigenvalues in the H. So you need to set the phi pi and phi y in such a way that all the eigenvalues are within the unit circle. So we basically show that this is not enough in the nonlinear model, and we define the stability region, and we define it in a way that the ST must be smaller than ST minus 1. And so we have this, we came up with this equation. So basically, if I should illustrate again by this picture, is basically that you enforce that you never end up on the policy functions outside of the stability region. So you need to set up your phi pi and phi y that you don't get from the, you don't cross the threshold. Okay, and so here are the results, right? So this is for the basic new Keynesian model, and so what is here on this axis is the weight on output. This is the weight on inflation. The gray area is the standard determinacy region, right? So you could basically choose any point. The central bank can choose any point in this gray area to well anchor the inflation expectation. And here the green line we plot with our stability region. So those are the combination of phi pi and phi y to ensure the stability that you never cross this threshold region. Those red triangles are the 3 scenarios we consider. So basically what I do is that I take the, I go through the top 5 journals and take the Taylor estimates. And those are all the crosses, and then I pick 3 scenarios. So one well inside the stability region, one which is in the linear model is a well-determined solution, but it's outside of the stability region, and one on the border. And we can take a look what it does with what it implies for the model solution. So here in this table, here are the moments, the macro moments of the consumption hours worked, nominal interest rate, inflation. Here is the price dispersion, are the moments of price dispersion, which is expressed directly in the percentage of output losses. And here the 3 scenarios. So is the one which is within the stability region. So you see that the first order, third order, and the global solution, where we do it, the global we have used both time iteration methods and projection methods. So you see that you get the same moments, and the policy functions are virtually also the same. So you get basically the same solution, right? When you move on the border, like on the border of the stability region, you see that already the third order moments are very much elevated because of this price dispersion spiral, which starts kicking in, is magnifying the whole model dynamics. And when you get to this, to this, I think it's a Taylor estimate, which is, which is in the determinacy. So the linear solution is perfectly fine, right? In terms of moments, you get the standard moments, quite similar to what you get. Okay, so you get a, well-behaved model. But up to with the third order, when you come with a nonlinear solution, you see that you get already the crazy results, right? So you get a huge model dynamics. You get the impossibility, for example, it's the minimum of price dispersion. So it cannot cross 0 in this, cannot be more than 0 or less than 1, and in this expression more less than 0. So you see that you get a, you are way below the lower bound. You also get the maximum of price dispersion is basically in this economy you would lose 67% of output because of the price dispersion. Here are also that, and here we calculated in the 44% cases in the simulation, the 44% periods you would violate the lower bound. There's also upper bound on inflation, which I didn't tell you about, but you also violate this one. So the one important implication of the stability is that once you are out of the stability region, so basically there is no global solution for the model outside of the stability region, right? So
could you please mention max and mean which are presented there? So what do they stand for?
So this is the maximum price dispersion in the simulation, and this is the minimum price dispersion in terms of loss of output, in the terms of lost output. So there are realization in the economy where you lose 67 is the maximum you lose, but you lose 67% of output. So this actually, just one time I want to demonstrate with is that this from the well-behaved model in the linear settings, you get crazy model in the nonlinear settings. That's one point. The other point I want to make on the next slide is that actually this solution is not correct. So it's all coming on the cost of approximation errors, because then there doesn't exist the global solution.
But if my state variables from minus infinity to infinity, and I take a short order approximation, then it's quite likely that I will have also quite large range, not bounded by max and min. Or am I losing here something?
So I'm also not sure where are you heading. So the min and max is the minimum and maximum value out of the simulation. So these are we simulate, for example, 1 million periods, right? And we calculate the maximum and minimum.
Is it 1 over s, which pin down max and min after short order approximation? Because you approximate s rather than delta?
Yeah, so there is a direct link, right? So we have a S in the model, and this is a direct link. I just wanted to show it's harder to interpret the S, right? So it's nicer to express it that's what they do in the literature, to express it straight away in terms of the output losses. So here it's just changing the units. So the units are how much output you lose because of this misalignment in dispersion of prices. So let me maybe continue. Maybe
yeah, let's probably continue because we are running out of time, and we can leave more technical questions by the end. So because there is another meeting at 5, and I think many people can leave. So let's try to finalize the presentation and then give questions by the end.
Okay, thanks. So we look for the nonlinear policy function, right? Which is the price dispersion, which is the function of the yesterday price dispersion and the AT, the TFP shock, as a fixed point of the nonlinear system of difference equation implied by the DSG problem, DSG model, sorry. So the problem is that for some realization of AT, particularly the negative TFP shocks, will imply the high inflation. And the relevant state space in the ST minus dimension becomes unbounded. So there is no specified grid on the ST-1 grid will be not large enough. So the ST will always falls out of the outside of this grid, because exactly this is the reason, because this ST is bigger than ST-1 when we are in this instability region. So where the pi t, the inflation, is bigger than this threshold inflation, which implies the price dispersion spiral. So making the ST-1 grid larger is no help, because the new ST will again fall outside of the enlarged ST-1 grid. So the intuitive way how I picture it here is basically, you can think of it as an expanding universe, right? So this universe would be defined by ST-1, and you are searching for the solution, but just when you are on the edge, the universe again expands even more, right? Because you turn to the ST, which is bigger than ST-1, and so again, and you can never catch up the expanding universe by in your search algorithm. So that's the intuitive maybe interpretation of what's going on, why there is no global solution. Okay, so still 10 minutes only. So here it's well known in the literature that trend inflation actually shrinks the determinacy region, but we show that it shrinks much more the stability region. So basically, in the economy with the trend inflation, right? So I don't know if you have trend inflation 10%, so like Okay, maybe it's too high. So let's inflation 5%. So if the inflation expectations are at 5%, so then to stabilize inflation, the monetary policy needs to be extremely strict. So basically, no zero weight on the stabilizing the real economy. It has to be really, really just the inflation targeter. The other important thing is the level of the real rigidity in the economy. So in general, Calvo pricing is not enough to capture the effect of price stickiness on the quantities. So the real rigidities are the mechanism which lowers firms' incentive to increase prices in the face of rise in the nominal demand. So if you switch off the real rigidity mechanism, so you see that it actually widens the stability region quite a bit. So the level of real rigidity is important for the stability region. Okay, so here again, this summarizes the what I was saying in the numerical fashion. So again, here we have a model with the trend inflation, but quite aggressive monetary policy. So you are well in the stability region. So you see that the solution of the first third order and global virtually the same. And you are moving outside of the stability region. Again, things get crazy. This explodes, and this is actually, it's inheritance of the numerical error of the approximation errors of the perturbation solution. Basically, there is no global solution, as I try to convince you. And this is the case for no decreasing return to scale. So so when you kill the real rigidity, so it means that so the real rigidity is the stability region increases. Okay, so I have no time to go through the economic channels, but I will maybe want to show you the when we show that this mechanism actually works also in the larger models which were used before in the literature. So in the first slide, we could argue that okay, but there are other basic new Keynesian models which were solved non-linearly in the literature. No one reports this problem with the instability, right? So we used few of them. In particular, this Anderson 2010, like 2014, and Miao and Go 2019. And basically, what we show is that the reason is that they always calibrated their Taylor rule, strong enough that it's well in the stability region. So, for instance, this is for the paper Miao and Go. So you see that they set their the Taylor rule parameters into the stability region. But once, for example, when you increase the trend inflation to 4%, the model immediately becomes unstable and falls out from the stability region. So the other thing what we do is that we show that we use that this mechanism is the key to explain why the yield curve is upward sloping in the Rubus-Swanson model. So the Rubus-Swanson model is like a breakthrough model in the macrofinance literature. They are the first one to show that their model is able to generate the upward sloping term structure of interest rate, and they use the inflation risks as the key explanation why people buy long bonds only on a discount. So we show that so that their calibration of the Taylor rule. So they have a more complicated Taylor rule. So their calibration of the Taylor rule actually lies outside of the stability region, and but it lies just on the border. So it's not explosive enough, but this explosiveness of price dispersion generates such a high inflation risks that they manage to get enough nominal inflation risk premia in their model. So again, this is just to show that once you would increase in their model inflation to 4%, they would get outside of the model would be still determinate, so the linear solution perfectly fine, but it would be outside of the stability region. So so the moments are explosive, and that's what again what we demonstrate here in these large tables. So again, those are the moments. are the macro moments, finance models moments. This is about this is the set with the price dispersion, and here are the moments. So for the Swanson replication, right? So you see that even in their baseline model, the solution, they violate them, the lower bound on price dispersion. You get the periods when you lose 70% of output because of the dispersed prices, and that's the way basically they manage to generate the nominal term premium, which is close to 1% in the bond. So they manage to match the data, and this shows when you add some trend inflation. I think in this case it's in this case it's 1.6% yearly only. So you get already very unstable dynamics with a crazy minimum price dispersion. You get the 51% of the simulations violate the lower bound on price dispersion. Also, the upper bound is violated. And then we show a few fixes, right? So if you kill the real rigidity, you would again get back to the stability region because you enlarge it. Or here we have a scenario when you really increase the weight on inflation, that again you would shift the stability region. It would shift it to the stability region. But you see that this is also decreasing than the nominal term premia, and also the indexations also helps. Or you could use the different pricing mechanism, which if you use the Rothenberg, then you don't have a dispersed prices and no misalignment in the relative prices. So let me quickly conclude, since I'm running out of time. So in a way, the Calvo pricing is Calvo pricing mechanism is a shortcut to model nominal rigidities without having really a solid micro foundation. And so the idea is, as long as the model delivers the realistic prediction, so matches the moment and impulse response functions about the economy under scrutiny, so it can be used to explain observable data. But in this case, only in the linear settings, right? So it remains to be determined if actually Calvo pricing is an ideal tool to model nominal rigidities in the nonlinear model, and it still remains to be empirically validated if how much this price dispersion spiral is actually relevant empirically. This the story I told you at the beginning, how the beer companies are trying to find the optimal price in respect to each other. Okay, so any I guess 2 minutes for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Aleš, very much for your talk. So just in 2 minutes, there is another event on the topic of migration, and I think many people are interested to join this event as well. So just let me mention that we have the record, and we will put the video on our website. So if you miss something, you can always watch it online. But let us have another a couple of minutes to take questions, if there are any. So I had actually, you already answered my question because it was about whether Calvo pricing is a realistic mechanism, at least in this type of environment when we have high inflation. But you already answered it in your concluding remarks. But maybe you can speculate a little bit and think, what can we? Are there any kind of thoughts on how we can improve Calvo pricing model, since it's like a workhorse in DSG model, to be more able to reflect the high inflation environment more realistically?
Mm-hmm. Well, so you can always introduce indexation, right? Or you just have to have a stricter monetary policy to discipline to basically calibrate the model to be in the stability region, right? So then everything works in terms of the moment dynamics as in the linearized models. So I think so. I also think that the message it tells, right, that these price adjustments are actually might cause the self-enforcing price inflation spiral. So we don't validate it empirically, but I found the story plausible, at least to some extent, right? So So there is indeed the wage inflation spiral, but there can be also the price inflation spiral. If the inflation is growing fast and the companies need to adjust prices a lot, that you see that this dispersion in expectations, so they don't know what prices they should set, right? So when so in this search process, which we don't model, right? We just do it exogenously through Calvo pricing. So I find even something plausible in the story. So it might not be just all about that Calvo pricing is bad for nonlinear models, but there might be also something true about the story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe there are some other questions that we have.
But you are making a statement that Calvo models, Calvo pricing is kind of unrealistic future for nonlinear model. But if we look on other articles like Nakamura, etc., they are pointing out some futures of nonlinear solutions like deflationary biased for the recent spike of inflation, which is coming from non-linearities, and they find evidence in support of such bias. So maybe the right way to say that when we are dealing with nonlinear solutions, there are elements which are not realistic, but there are also elements which are realistic. So it's like in the end, it's not really 0-1 answer to that Calvo pricing, and they need to consider nonlinear solution in the models with Calvo pricing.
Yeah. So I agree, right? So at the beginning, I was basically arguing that to have a dispersion of prices which you observe, right? You need to have a nonlinear solution, and then in a way, I'm saying maybe Calvo is not the best thing to use in a nonlinear model. So I think it's half and half, right? So part of the story is true. So the dispersion of prices matters probably. So we should have it in the model. The question is if the Calvo is the best way to introduce the dispersion of prices. If I got you correctly, Vadim.
Yeah, and my colleagues were mentioning that dispersion is unobservable, then maybe we could put a limit on the price dispersion that firms actually see, etc., right? That's where we may go.
Okay, so thanks a lot.
Yeah, okay. So I don't see any other questions, but I guess if you have any, you can always reach Aleš by email.
I would be happy about it if you have any feedback or comments.
So thank you very much for this presentation. You have already been to Kyiv a couple of years ago for the DSG workshop that we organized. And I would like to invite you to Kyiv again when we got our victory, and we will have another workshop here. So you're always welcome. Hope to see you soon, and let's keep in touch. And thank you everyone for attending.